All right.
Good morning.
Yay. Good morning.
Well, welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages people, projects, or processes, or all kinds of things for a living. I am Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode where Sharon and I explore leadership topics from the perspective of what not to do.
So today we're talking about a mistake that looks disciplined and organized on the surface, but usually creates a lot of unnecessary friction and problems. And that is forcing every single project to fit into the same system, process, methodology, plan, way of doing things, one template, one framework, one way of working, absolutely no exceptions.
This, Sharon, it sounds a little against the grain on what we preach openly on this show.
System.
Have that methodologies, but this is the the how we do things around here approach, which how we do things around here could be royally screwed up. It sounds consistent. It feels structured. But not every project has the same complexity, risk profile, or stakeholder expectations.
Yes, exactly. Regulatory compliance, all right, maybe not the same thing as product innovation, right? Completely different needs. But a lot of times organizations will apply the same process to both because they only know one way of working. And then they wonder why their teams are constrained or frustrated or not able to accomplish their goals.
I've seen teams, I've run teams, but I didn't make this mistake. But I've seen teams run like daily stand-ups for projects that didn't need them. I've seen these long, rigid, as we all have experienced this in tech as long as we have, rigid waterfall plans for initiatives that clearly required flexibility because change was constant. And they ended up delivering what nobody actually wanted by the time they were delivered. In both cases, the process became the problem.
Well, I mean, when the thing you're working on literally doesn't exist by the time you're done with the project,
might be an issue.
Might have a problem.
Yeah. It's a matter of opinion. You know, I've seen it both ways.
I mean, ultimately, a system, a process, a methodology should ultimately serve the work, not the other way around. So before you choose an approach, leaders really need to evaluate what they need. Look at things like scope, risk, timeline, stakeholder tolerance, maybe for a change.
Yeah, let's be honest. Waterfalls still works in the right context.
Government.
So does Agile. So does a hybrid model. The mistake is treating one of them like a religion instead of a tool.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, there's a lot of areas where things tend to fit, but the strongest teams know how to fine tune their approach and use the right thing in the right time, the right way. Yep. They adjust if and when needed. They're aware of it. They don't abandon their discipline. They don't derail their momentum. Ultimately, they do the right thing because if they don't, forcing the wrong framework Doesn't end up creating control. It just creates problems.
Oh, I've got some stories to tell on this one. I just remembered another one that I need to. In fact, the story. Yeah, I need to. Okay, I'll make sure that I see that one again. As always, should be a great practical discussion, if not slightly uncomfortable for some people. But we'd love to hear your experiences, share your feedback. Especially if you've ever watched a methodology slow down the very work it was meant to improve, which is one of my stories that I'm going to share. There's lots to talk about here.
Yeah, so let's get started with some definitions.
I think of this, forcing this in the box. I think we laid it out pretty squarely that methodology should be a tool in your toolbox, not your identity. It's
what?
There's a paraphrase.
Now,
during my MBA program, had this older gentleman who's it would always quote his father. And there's a guy that worked, I think he worked at like Raytheon or something. Like he was literally a rocket scientist and was doing his master's in his senior years. There's always good to go back and to learn more and stretch yourself. Anyway, but he said, to paraphrase his father, like a methodology is a rule to live by, not a rule to die by.
Yes, but you don't understand, Christian. I don't know what all of the people are going to do with their Agile or safe letter jackets now.
That's true. True.
What will they do with their identities?
But the moment that you say something like, this is just how we do things here, then you stop evaluating whether it's actually working or not. There you are, married to the process, not to that. It's one of the reasons why, and I've shared again and again, past companies where I have managed mostly PMOs, project management and some product management, but engineers and analysts and those kinds of things. But I would always say, hey, I will pay for, I got the funding for you to go and get your PMP certification, for example. But I never want to see you trying to apply 100% of what you've learned. As that is the key. That's the thing that sometimes people are so excited. I know you saw this with Six Sigma is the same thing as the PMP certification, project management professional.
Yep.
Is that people then want to go and apply 100% of what they've learned instead of having the wisdom to navigate and apply those pieces which are relevant and will actually add value to the project.
Yeah, and I think that's where some people get the idea of leaders being control freaks or micromanagers and things like that, is that ultimately they're not trying to make sure that everybody's following the same system and that the system is helping them deliver better, faster, more consistently. They spend all of their time basically babysitting the methodology or the process and slapping hands when you don't write the right word down or say the right thing or call it the right thing or follow the right, step or whatever. If you find yourself being worried about something being called a ceremony and making sure that you have the right ceremonies, are you really focusing on the right things?
Yeah. I mean, one, you could call it consistency. Like, hey, you've got that structure, you've got that methodology. Consistency feels safe, but forcing every project into the same framework, it's not discipline, it's rigidity. You're inflexible. Rigidity often creates more friction than control because you're unwilling to listen. You're unwilling to adapt to that. I know we're not yet at storytelling, but I think like this exact example. I was with the company, we got acquired. We had suddenly by a bigger company. Suddenly we had 3 times the number of products. From my old company, a number of our best salespeople came over with the acquisition. They immediately went to their past clients who they had great relationships with that were very happy customers and said, hey, I've got these new products. And they started marking up sales. And you had a person, individual, a senior in this acquiring company that scuttled, shut down those sales because they hadn't run through the process, the sales process. And they lost multiple deals. There were people that were willing to buy the new products because of the strength of the relationship with the salespeople. And somebody was forcing the waterfall method. We've not even done a scoping process with them to find out if, this, whatever it is that they want to find out about it. And so that it just stood out to me as an example of, you got in your own way. In that case, from a sales perspective, when someone's writing you a check, shut up. Stop trying to sell them when they're sold.
And I think that's just it, right? The impact of having a framework that is not flexible and that you can't use, people end up going around the framework because it's not solving the problem. It's not helping them. It's not in alignment. And to be fair, we are not saying that you shouldn't have one or that you shouldn't follow things. The problem is when you focus so much on the framework and the methodology and going through all the right moves to get to the end, instead of focusing on what you're trying to accomplish and making sure that everything is in alignment overall.
Right. I just smirking because it does seem like it's counterintuitive to what we say all the time of have a process, follow the process. But no, this is the part 2 to that is
have a process that works.
Have a process that works, yes, but utilize what part of the process is necessary, that's relevant, that's contextual at that moment. If it's not relevant, don't force fit something that doesn't fit.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes a 12 or 24 month process or 12 or 24 month project is going to have a different type of framework than a 2-week project. They might follow the same methodology. Right. They might follow the same process, but they're going to have different things that are going to need to happen. In a 2-week project, you're not going to have time to do every single ceremony that happens in the Agile methodology. You won't even have time for the ceremonies, let alone to get the work done.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's a bad framework or a bad methodology. It just means that you need to rethink what are the things that actually need to do and how do I need to fit them in?
Right. Again, I go back to, I think a great example for this is like the sales process and being more on the marketing side of those things and seeing a lot of those things push through is that, if you're out there trying to qualify them from a marketing to a sales qualified lead where, the executive, the CFO has already written you the check. It's like, take the check, move on. Don't force through these unnecessary steps. That sends weird mixed signals to the client. Then they start having, trust issues with everybody that's in between that convinced them to write the check in the first place. But yeah, from a project management standpoint, I mean, I saw this again and again, personal experience where I did this, where I tried to stick to that regiment where I had internal clients. This goes back to the phone company that was just like, look, it's a done deal. We know we're doing this. Let's schedule the training. We realize we catch up. Let's get ahead of this on the training. We understand this piece of it. We don't need to go through these other steps. You're still trying to convince us. We're convinced. We're past that. Let's jump now to the training. And I just like, oh, okay. And I had just a weird conversation where I go back into my manager and I had built out this PMO structure and we had spent all this time painstakingly outlining the process, the methodology, and so sitting down with the manager, who I thought would be upset because of trying to drill it through my head of these steps, and this is why we do these things, and data reasons. There's like we still go through the steps, and his response was like, no, he's right. Let's just go and we'll fill in the other paperwork for the other stuff just for data reasons, so we can learn from the project overall. But yeah, this is all being expedited. So just go. That's my approach too, is that when I talk to people about that is like, how much are we force fitting? How much of this is like, do we have the wrong culture in our team where we think we have to go through and do all this paperwork when this is moving a lot faster, or this project doesn't fit that methodology?
So let's talk about some of the things that can go wrong. So let's talk about some of the pitfalls of kind of going down the path of, just saying, we're just going to use the exact same thing for everything.
Yeah, I think it was we've talked about the last few episodes when process becomes the bottleneck. And that was, again, the sales process. That's with, the methodology. Sitting here, you're talking about like in a waterfall method. Oh, but you're skipping 2 steps. Right. We're intentionally skipping let's move on to that next piece. You need to be smart about skipping steps because there might be the documentation, thorough understanding. Make sure, just want to make sure that you do understand we bypass this step. You're assuming responsibility. You've said yes to these things and you have a risk profile for that. But the other thing that happens you start having, this is one of the most natural things. You start having these meaningless meetings because that's the way that we're structured to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Sharon, the last time that you worked at a place where they're in their methodology, you had specific formal meetings that were named, that were part of the process. It's been a while since I had that, but I can remember going into those, and some of them just felt completely unnecessary. Like, what are we doing here? We know this. Send me an email. I'll fill out the form. Boom. We don't need to sit here for an hour with all of these people. We could have just filled out a form, giving you the information and move on to the next step.
Yeah, I definitely think like sometimes you end up rituals can serve a purpose. So rituals and ceremonies is a lot of times what we call a methodology, or rituals and ceremonies. And the idea behind a ritual or ceremony is that we don't miss important things. That's the purpose. The purpose is that we don't miss important things. Like you said, sometimes those types of rituals or ceremonies, because they're not serving a purpose, they tend to cause more problems than they solve. And so what ends up happening is you get these, meetings where people don't care, they're not participating, they think it's a waste of time. And ultimately, sometimes it is if you're not actually using it for the purpose that it's intended to. And I think, from an example perspective, I see this a lot where you will put those things into place. Nobody will prepare. Nobody will be ready for it. You show up and then everybody's like, wait, why are we here?
Yeah.
And so now we've wasted everybody's time because nobody is ready for that particular step in the process. And so sometimes those things are there designed to do something, but if they're not being used properly, then they really just do become kind of a little bit of a waste of time.
Right. I was just thinking of a good example of this. This pitfall is, again, having these multiple meetings around governance for building on an intranet on SharePoint, and going through and asking all these questions, and people they're not prepared to answer any of the questions that are in those sessions. And what we end up doing is really, for the majority of the questions that we would ask in that meeting, they end up going to the default settings of the deployment anyway.
Next.
Right. And so it's a big waste of everybody's time. Again, what happens when you do that with a customer is that they then get frustrated. Like, what am I doing? Am I paying for all this time that's wasted? It's like, just go with the default. They're like, I'm asking you as the experts to tell me what I should be doing with each of these different pieces. And again, you're being driven by the process, the methodology. You still need to have those questions answered. You still need to have those things documented of the decisions that are made. But that by having these structured meetings and steps, you need to be more flexible, more dynamic, and really understand what do we actually need to do with the customer and their valuable time.
And maybe make sure that you've got the right meetings and steps and process, right? So again, it's not about it. We do agree that we should have a methodology. We should have a framework. We should have a process of some point. But make sure when you're in your, analysis phase of the project that you are using the right methodology, the right framework, the right meetings. And if anything isn't necessary for that particular thing, get rid of it. change it, move it, so that you don't create drag on your process, or you don't create drag on your project that doesn't need to be there.
One of the complaints when people hear the word methodology, they translate that as bureaucracy. And there's a reason why they think that, because when it's rigidly being adhered to, there's more documentation, there's more stand-up meetings, there's more structure, there's more sign-offs, there's more decisions by committee. And suddenly the framework that's meant to accelerate things, that's really slowing it down. We're adding all of this bulk. And so that's why I go back to what I would tell my project managers, especially, that going for their certification and apply what will accelerate, apply what is necessary for the project. Only what is necessary for the project.
Yeah, exactly. So you ready to move on to the good side of this, which is
so talk strategies. So I know this because we've both built out methodologies. What is your high level approach for this? What's your synopsis? How do we solve this in 30 seconds or less?
Yeah, right. So philosophical conversation's been going on my entire career, and will probably go on as long as it's around, right?
45 seconds. All right. Give you the extra time.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, I think at the end of the day, first and foremost, I think you need to understand what methodologies are out there and maybe why your organization has chosen the methodologies and frameworks that you're using. Be educated on them, right? Understand what they are, what their pros, what their cons, what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. And I know that some organizations choose certain frameworks or methodologies for certain reasons and certain purposes. I'm not saying don't use it, right? I'm not trying to knock any of them, but understand them, because ultimately the more that you understand about each one, why they're chosen, what their strength, and I'm going to say strengths and weaknesses are, right? Then when you go to look at each individual project, each individual process, you can see why one might work a little better than another. Or let's say you don't have the choice to switch between waterfall or agile. We have to use a certain methodology because we're compliant and we're certified and da-da-da-da-da. At least within that particular framework where your flexibilities are and where you should or should not change.
I will add to that you need to train your leaders, train your PMs on the multiple approaches, of course, but to also let them know that they have permission to tune it midstream or change methodology altogether. Adjust their cadence, drop rituals that add no value. This meeting that we're planned is like, we got all the information for it. We're waiting on a couple different pieces. We don't need to pull everybody into an entire meeting to answer these two questions. So discipline doesn't mean stubbornness. It's more about alignment, and you can have the alignment without some of those rituals.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think for each project so once you understand what they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what the different things you can do are, then for each project, you need to understand all the dynamics of that project. You need to determine what you're going to do, and you need to put in place what are your no matter what's, right? What are your boundaries? Like, these are the things we have to have no matter what. These are the things that are flexible. These are the areas where we can change or not change. And then that way you can make those decisions as you go throughout the project. And then everybody's on the same page, right? At the end of the day, what I really want to try to do is make sure that everybody is in agreement on what's happening so that we are all kind of aligned and working together.
Yeah. It's funny. We talked about a few episodes back. We were talking about reorging, in a broader organization. And this is one of those things. Again, I just never fear a restructure or reorg of the project, the alignment. If something's not working, call it out. This part is not working. Or if something that worked well over here and it's not part of the plan, and it's like, hey, this is something what we really want to go and do. I mean, certainly I would say, every project should have different components. Like, everything should have an official kickoff that spells out the scope, the stakeholders, here's what our purpose is, here's what we're trying to do. And whether that's a 30 to 60 minute meeting where you're doing that and people are on the line, everybody's together.
Yep.
Say, here's the roles and responsibilities, who's doing what, here's what we think, here's our approach, here's what we think the stage gate, whatever the methodology, the phases of the project that we'll get through, the rough timeline, here's how we've scoped it. Here are risks that we've identified up front that could happen. Here's how we're going to communicate. So the communication plan, here's where the project planning is. If you got to already have like a portfolio view of the multiple projects and it's an established thing, let people know, hey, you can come and participate. Here's how you participate. Here's the feedback loops. Here's all these mechanisms, all of that in that launch. The other one that you must have, I believe, is some kind of post-mortem where you're learning from the project. And it may not have that great of scale, but you can let everybody know, now that this project is concluded, we're going to go back and look at it and what we did right and wrong and what happened and all those kinds of things. My personal belief, Sharon, you might disagree, is launch, post-mortem, completely flexible about everything that happens in between and how.
Yeah, I definitely think there should be some sort of status updates, whether that's meetings or emails or whatever. But beyond that, I agree. Like everything else can be flexible. But then again, that's just the way we operate and the way that we think it's successful. And but yeah, that's the key, is understanding what will work for your team and your project and your organization.
Right.
Speaking of, I'm going to say this out loud. You need to learn how to separate your identity from your methodology. I kind of made a joke. I made a little bit of a barb earlier. What will we do with all of our letter jackets, right? Because ultimately, I do think there are people who kind of have tied their identity to certain types of methodology, and they think that that is the only way. There is no other way. Now, I personally, I see a lot of value in things like the Agile methodology. I do. I also see value in waterfall methodology. I also see value in other methodologies, right? There are values in those, but there are people who like to stand and say, this is the only way that will work and no other way will work. And you just can't label a methodology as right or wrong, and you can't tie your identity around it. Instead, you need to understand, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And is it helping us to accomplish the goal that we've set for ourselves?
I think you're right. I think that we need to end methodology bigotry.
I should have the image for this episode totally should have been like West Side Story, like the agile letter jackets against the safe letter jackets or something. That'd have been funny. I know. And Christian and I are definitely privileged in that we are consultants, we're independent.
Once you're a jet, you're always a jet. I know.
We are not working for an organization that is credentialed and certified around a certain methodology. But I do find it humorous that, it does tend to be a little bit more identity based than maybe it should be.
Well, and there are certain things. Well, like you have your always Sharon talking about her Six Sigma friends, and I'm not allowed to sit at the Six Sigma lunch table with the cool kids. But look, there are kind of, there's kind of the fraternities of the, almost the birds of a feather type groupings there. I've been to, luncheons for PMs and BAs. When I lived in that world, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, I used to seek out kind of industry groups and things to go. I was part of a CEO roundtable when I had my startup, and you do that kind of naturally. But you can't lose sight of that. Again, I have said at some different companies where there was kind of the infighting around the different things, where I just have literally done this. Folks, same team here. Yeah. Because it almost became this religious battle around it. And we said, like, clearly there's things that are working, things that are not working here. Let's be honest about those things and an approach. Ignore, like, it's hard to step away from that bias that we each have. towards the things that we have done and done it this way. We've always done it this way here. But that's what you need to do. You need to pause and have a discussion. What's the best way forward that's best for this situation, recognizing that it may be different than all of the methodologies that are at war here.
Yeah. I think ultimately, as we talk about best practices, I definitely think you should train your leaders on the different methodologies that are available, because I think that they need to understand what they are, what the strengths and weaknesses are, as people come in from different organizations with different backgrounds and different experience and different knowledge. It will help them to understand, how to train them up and how to use that knowledge for their own benefit. As people come in and as people, come and go from the different projects and the different teams and things like that. I think, I'm a big fan of knowledge is power.
Yeah. There's a lot that you can do if you go in and if you automate is put part of your, front door process, the intake of new projects. There's questions that you can ask to, it's not just scoping of the technical, effort that needs to be done there, but, do a lot more scoping, have other scoping questions out of that might help you better understand the methodology to apply or the approach for that project. So that's something you can get a lot of that out of the way by just that intake process, and then have your team trained on those different methodologies. It might be if there's a project that comes in, if it's IT related, if you own kind of all of operations, and it's more IT that you might give it to somebody that specializes in IT project management to be the lead on it versus somebody that's focused more on the business systems. So that's part of your load balancing there. But there, again, I was mostly serious about saying there's only the initial launch and then the post-mortem at the end there. Obviously, there's stuff in between them. And weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever it is, multiple status meetings, which is the life of a project manager, is providing and conducting status meetings. But with all of that, if you are more introspective on, during all of these projects, and we talk about this regularly, going and looking at how are these projects, how are these processes working, and are we getting feedback where we need to change anything about the methodology? If you make that part of the culture of your organization, where people recognize, like, we're going to adhere to the process, our methodologies, but they know it's part of the culture, is that we're constantly reviewing and refining the methodology, then you're not going to run into these issues. And again, it's so many of these things. So much of this is the culture of the team. And if people are afraid to speak up, then you're going to find that rigidity.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think your governance and your culture should identify, this is what we do, this is why we do it, and this is how we change it. Because ultimately, we want to know what we're doing. We want to know why we're doing it. We want to do things that work, but we also want to have opportunities to change it. And I think, having structure is important, but having flexibility within that structure matters just as much. And when you do that, you create psychological safety, because now your teams understand. They understand what the options are. They understand what to do. They understand why you're doing it. They understand when they can change it, and they feel confident to bring up when something needs to change.
Yeah. I think that, again, this is something where I think companies would be, as part of their new employee onboarding, should talk about that governance process, should talk about how we do things, about how we don't shoot the messenger for identifying, hey, there are problems that need to be fixed there. But as part of that process, it's not enough just to complain about that something's working in the way that it's inefficient or you've seen it better elsewhere. Be constructive with your feedback. And here's what I think, here's how I think this would, here's why, and here's what I think the measurable result would be from that.
Yes, never being a problem without a solution. This is like if I could say one good tip, never bring a problem without a solution.
I believe in that wholeheartedly. That's something that I'm trying to remember. I think it was as a teenager. Trying to remember. It's like, yeah, so it was before. For some of you know, like I went to university when I was 15 years old. I skipped a couple grades. I think I had a great tutor when I was 14, 15 years old, that I think that's where I picked that up, where I don't even remember what the topic was. I was taking classes at the community college at the time and coming back and meeting with my tutor and I was complaining about something or other. And Pat, who is fantastic, said, I remember, I could see her saying this, but said, never just complain about something, Christian. If you got a problem, like come to me with a solution for the problem. So think it through. It's not enough to complain. That's what it was. Not enough to complain about a problem. Bring me your solution to the problem.
Yeah. But I think when we talk about this topic, it's so true, right? Because what will happen is a manager, a project manager, a leader, whatever will decide we're going to run this project this way. And you as a team member or you as a project manager are like, look, this isn't working. But you can't just say it's not working. You need to say, this isn't working. And I have a better idea. I have a better way. I have a recommendation. So as we talk about calls to action, I think you need to think about what in your scope right now that maybe you're leading or managing, or maybe you're a team member on a project, what's not working, and go and audit that and say, hey, look, I understand why we're doing this, but I don't think it's working. And I think there's a better way to do this. Can we have a conversation?
I would add a second part to it. So I agree. I think great call to action out of this session this week. Ask your team a simple question. Is our current methodology, is it helping or is it creating friction? Is it creating drags and slowing us down? The answer to that might be uncomfortable. And I think a great thing to do is, as the part 2 to the call to action is, enable your team to make one small adjustment. Somebody identifies things, find something that you can go, right, we're going to make this change. Let them see the change in action. That's a key part of the transparency here, is when people feel like I've told you this is a problem, then nothing ever gets fixed. That's a major problem. If somebody says that, like they're unwilling to share because every time they've pointed things out, nothing ever gets done. You need to make that transparent. Here's the feedback. We made the change. Let's now watch and measure the impact of that change.
Yeah, I feel like I have the opposite. I feel like I have the opposite problem often is somebody will say, I think we need to change something. I'm like, all right, let's change it. And everybody's like, wait, no, we should.
Shouldn't I explain it first? Nope, already changed.
Already changed, too late. No, I do think it's good, though. I agree. I think, empower your team, empower your coworkers, empower your groups to identify those things and start putting changes in place because you know what, we're, especially with everything that's going on right now in the world, the only constant is change.
There's something going on in the world that I don't pay attention to. I don't watch TV or go outside or talk to people. So,
well, you blinked, the world changed.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is it for this week. Thank you again for watching. We'll be back next Monday at 9 a.m. every Monday. But in the meantime, if you've not yet subscribed, please subscribe. Click on the notification bell out on YouTube. Comment, share with us your thoughts on the latest episode. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.